Well, thank you so much for coming today. Welcome. I am Teacher Jenny, as most in the room know. I am the learning specialist here at school, and I've been in education for over 15 years with very diverse positions: gifted education, special education, general education. So I'm very excited to be the learning specialist here at MPFS. And Teacher Claire is my counterpart. She has been at MPFS for nearly a decade, which is amazing. And it is Claire who has led the Science of Reading initiative here at school, and also the one who really facilitated this morning where we can bring parents in and chat about what it means when you have an emerging reader and how you can support them, and what we do here at MPFS that is exceptional in kind of leading the way to support our students. So just quickly, there's a bathroom down, by the stairs. We also have some handouts here for you. I will actually bring around. These will help guide the morning. On the first slide, you will see an agenda. We will be talking about really how we learn to read, and what is the science of reading. Now, just quickly, before today, with a raise of hands, who has heard of the term the science of reading before? Okay, great.
Good.
Yeah, wonderful. So we'll be talking a little bit more in depth about what exactly that means. What is that concept? And then we'll talk about here at MPFS, what does that look like? How do we implement reading across our grade levels? And then how can I help and support my child at home? And then we can have a little questions and answers. It's lucky we have a small group today, so if you have child-specific questions, we might be able to shed a little bit more insight on those book choices and what we can do. Hi, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. Yes. So that is that's a little framework for the day, and it is. I think I gave you 2 copies. It is very casual. So if you have questions along the way, please feel free to ask away.
So, yeah, absolutely.
So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Claire, and she's going to start us, with our morning.
Hi. So as we said, this is very informal. So if you want to ask a question during the presentation, please feel free.
Can I actually?
Yeah, of course.
One thing I meant to do.
Yeah.
Can we just quickly share our name?
Yeah.
And whether we're a current student or a prospective student, and the age of our emerging readers or reader. So as I said, I'm Teacher Jenny, the learning specialist here at school. I have 2 current students, one of which is an emerging reader in 1st grade.
And I'm Teacher Claire. I'm the reading interventionist at Media-Providence, and I have my 3 kids are now just finished college. And when I started learning about the science of reading, I just thought it was so interesting, and it was just stuff that I didn't know about when my kids were learning to read. And so I thought that we hope you find this morning interesting. We hope you find it useful. We hope you go away with some knowledge you didn't have before. And if you think of questions after the presentation, please feel free to reach out to me. So yeah.
Hi, Blake. I have 2 kids here, Bernie and Evie. Bernie is a pretty good reader right now, and Evie is also a pretty good reader right now. But I'm kind of interested in making them better readers. I don't know. So.
Great.
Matt, I have a son in kindergarten.
Nice. Great. Ooh, lovely.
I'm Nick. This is my wife, Lorena. We have a 2.5-year-old Theodore, who's a prospective student, and I guess I'm pre-emerging reader, but we're just
Yeah.
more. So.
Awesome.
Great.
Yeah, great.
Thank you. So is learning to read rocket science? Well, actually, arguably it is. The science of reading is a science. It's been studied over the last 30 years or so by scientists, by psychologists, by neuroscientists, and by linguists, and by teachers. And so we have a pretty good understanding now of how the brain learns to read and how kids learn to read that we didn't have before. Now, in terms of learning to read, when kids are born, they are hardwired. You don't need to teach kids how to speak. That's something that you're born able to do. Even when a child is in the womb, a baby is in the womb, they start to pick up on sounds that they can hear. And within the first 6 months, a baby could speak any language, but within the first 6 months, they begin to tune into the sounds of the native language or languages that they speak at home. And so oral language is a receptive process. You learn by observing and by listening. And then by doing, but it's not something that we have to be explicitly taught. But the same is not true of reading and writing. And the reason scientists think that is because written language is such a new concept in humankind. If you could map out the timescale of humankind, the written expression would be yesterday lunchtime. And because it's such a new process, for some kids, you have to be explicitly taught how to read and write. And so reading really comes from building neural connections between different parts of the brain. So including the visual word form area and the language presenting form area. So when kids begin to learn to read, those neuroprocesses happen in the brain. So it's a neurological process, learning to read. And so when kids are learning to talk, they're learning a lot of oral language. And then when they come to school, from preschool into kindergarten, they really have to make that step from oral language into literacy. And for most students, that process takes around 36 months, which is about 3 years. It happens differently for different children. There are some kids who are born with hearing difficulties, for instance. It might take longer for them. There are some neurodivergent children who that process might take difficult. But that's kind of a rough estimate of the process of kind of learning to read. And it's a critical time of development between kindergarten to second grade, because when we're teaching kids to learn to read, that process happens quite quickly. And so the earlier we're able to do some intervention, the quicker that process is. So if you have a struggling reader and they continue to struggle, the older they get, this is not to be alarmist, because I fundamentally believe that any student can be taught to read whatever learning difficulties they have, but that process will take longer than if it happens within those first 36 months. So what is the science of reading? A couple of you, obviously educators, said they had heard of that term, the science of reading, but it's something that's actually is a hot topic in education at the minute. So if you look up the term science of reading, there'll be lots of articles in the New York Times, in the Atlantic, etc., that kind of talk more about why it's important. Now, it's a body of scientific research. It's not come from one person. It's come from a number of different scientists. And it's not a product or a particular curriculum. There are many different curriculums that embrace using the science of reading to teach reading. Another term that is sometimes used, and one that I actually prefer, is structured literacy. And structured literacy, I like that term because it encompasses all of the areas of literacy, which is speaking and listening, is writing, is spelling, and is reading. And so the term basically just means that we are teaching you to read in an explicit way and a systematic way. So we start here and we have steps to teach a child to read and to spell in an explicit way. It's not about just an introduction to literacy and giving them books to read and hoping that somewhere along the way they pick those things up. And the research identifies there are 5 main components, which we will talk through today, that are necessary to become a skilled reader. And this is a very simple diagram or description of those 5 components. And the area that we always start at is this pink area, which is phonemic awareness. Now, this is the area that starts first and is the area that is most prevalent in preschool. And that is oral language development. So a phoneme is a unit of sound. And so all of English language is broken into units of sound. So we have the English language is represented by letters. We have 26 letters in the English language, but those letters make 44 sounds. That can vary occasionally according to dialect, as you're aware. Obviously my accent, I would say some words differently than other people with a different dialect. But it's around 44 sounds. So the theory is if we can teach children those 44 sounds, then they are able to decode any word that they encounter in the English language. And so every word is broken into, the word that we have for sound is a phoneme. Hi, come in. And so, for instance, the word cat, you would hear the word cat, and you need to break that into 3 sounds. You're going to break that into k, a, t, cat. But the word shop, for instance, has 4 letters, but you're going to break that into 3 sounds because it has sh, o, p, because sh is a digraph. So it's important to teach that to kids because it reduces their cognitive load. They have to know that sh, you don't need to make 2 sounds, you're just going to make 1 sound for that word. And so phonemic awareness is the first stage of reading. Yes?
Wait, sorry.
Yeah, of course.
Saying 26 letters, 44 sounds.
Yeah.
Is the sh sound
One of those, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got on your handout, there is one of the pages on there. We've got
On the resources, the second resources.
yeah,
page.
the second resource page has like the list of the sounds that we use in school. So we say A, apple, A, B, bat, B. So that's helpful if you're kind of learning to read that. And those pictures have been chosen because they make the most direct sound that we use in the English language. So that's why it's been they've been chosen specifically for that. And it does have the diagrams on there as well. So so I hope that's helpful. So we need to, the first thing we need to do is we need to master phonemic awareness. So that's listening for words, hearing the sounds, like what does that word start with? What does that word end with? What sound do you hear? Now, when we've mastered that, we move on to the next section, which is phonics. And phonics is the transition from representing sounds into relating those sounds to letter symbols. And so that's when we start to look at words and we realize that those words have letters and each of those letters has a sound that represents it. So that's really what starts in kindergarten is the term phonics when we're doing letter sound symbols. And when we do spelling, we have to do the reverse operation in our brain. If you want to spell a word, we have to hear the whole word. We have to break it into sounds, which is called decoding. And then we have to think in our brain, right, what does that sound, what letter does that represent? And then we have to learn to spell it. And that process is called encoding. So breaking a word apart into sounds is called decoding it. Putting that word back together is called blending. And relating that to letter sound symbols is called encoding. So that all happens in phonics. When we've kind of started to master those skills, phonemic awareness and phonics, we move on to reading fluency. So when we first start to learn to read, your reading's going to be really choppy. It takes a lot of cognitive load on your brain to having to do all of those things. What are the sounds I'm hearing? How do I blend those words back together? So it gradually begins to be more automatic in the brain so that kids are beginning to do that and they begin to read more fluently. Now, this is why it's important to have lots of reading aloud at home because kids need to have fluent reading modeled for them. So it's important to have lots of read alouds, to hear you modeling how you read fluently with expression. And that's also when grammar comes into the situation because we're looking at punctuation, where you pause in the text, and how you read with expression. So that gradually becomes more and more automatic and more fluent. The next one is vocabulary. And again, this is an area that parents can really help at home. That's how do you develop vocabulary? Now, when we are speaking, we only use the words that we know. And so how do you develop a child's vocabulary is by listening to those words, by developing high-level vocabulary, and by listening to read alouds that are at a higher reading level than a child can read. Now, sometimes what we find in school is if you have a student who is a struggling reader, what happens is that child is reading quite low-level text at their reading level, and then you might have a student who comes to school as a skilled reader, and they're reading kind of Harry Potter and chapter books, and so their vocabulary is developing at a much higher rate than that student. And we know that as it's called the Matthew effect, which is a quote from the Bible, which basically means the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And so if we don't innovate, what happens is the student who's struggling, their vocabulary develops at a much lower rate than the child who is reading. So that's really where if you have a child who is a struggling reader, it's not always important to make them read every night at home to you. It's still really important for them to hear fluent reading modelled, to hear stories read that are at a higher reading level than they can read, so that their vocabulary is developing. Now, once we've got all of those skills, we move on to like the last area, which is comprehension. Now, this is like the, where we want to get to in reading. To be able to read a text and to be able to understand a text and to make inferences from a text. So you have to have all of these four areas before you can reach the stage of comprehension. So this is kind of, I'm not going to spend a long time on this graphic, but I really like this. This is called Scarborough's reading rope. And this is considered to be like the settled science of reading. If you ever read a book about how kids learn to read, it will always have this graphic in it. And it's a really good demonstration of just how complicated it is to learn to read for kids. And so all of these strands can become interwoven until you get to a point where you have someone who is a skilled reader, and a skilled reader who has fluent execution and coordination of word recognition and text comprehension. And again, this graphic starts from the bottom and moves upwards. So it starts with, again, phonological awareness, how to decode. Can they decode words? Can they do sight recognition? Now, in the English language, about 50% of words are decodable without any kind of other skill. And about 85% of words are decodable with one or more rule attached to them. So that leaves 15% of words in the English language that you just can't decode. That would be a word like was. If we tried to tap that word out, we would say as, was. It doesn't work. And so there are 15% of words that we have to teach students. You just have to know this word. This word is was, you just have to know it. And so at school, we know those as high frequency words, or as we call them, trick words. And so we send home some words that students just have to learn. And the reason for that is because they're not decodable. But the science of reading, what it really encompasses is if we can teach students how to decode that 85%, then it's much easier to get that 15%. We're not asking kids to have to memorize every single word in the English language. And so as we move up, it becomes, this is higher up the school. We're then getting to background knowledge. What are the concepts of the story? What is the vocabulary? What is the language structure? And so as they become more and more detailed, you become more and more of a skilled reader. Now, for me as a reading interventionist, what happens if you have someone who is not a skilled reader? Really what you have to do is you have to unravel that rope. Like, where did it go wrong? Like, what part of the reading process did not happen for that student? And quite often it goes back to here, word recognition. Sometimes we have students who come to school being a really good reader, and if they don't have phonics, if they're not sure how to decode words, they're very good at memorizing words, but what happens when they get to, and books when you're in first and second grade are often very repetitive, they're often very predictable, they often have a lot of pictures. But if they are not taught how to decode and encode words, what happens when they get to like fourth and fifth grade and they're dealing with much more multisyllabic words is they don't have these skills of word recognition. And then you have to go right back to the beginning to innovate that. So it's much better that all students have phonics instruction from the beginning of school.
It also translates to their spelling abilities as they get to higher grades as well.
Yeah, so I'll pass over to Teacher Jenny, and she's going to talk us through how we teach reading at school.
So here at MPFS, what does that look like? So we have a very explicit and structured approach to our emerging readers, and we use the Wilson Foundations programs in the early years, such as kindergarten, as we have some parents that know that. This is a great representation of what Foundations, the core concepts and the imagery that Wilson uses. So your child will recognize all of these sounds, and when you're working with them on certain letter sounds, you can use the A, apple, a. And for instance, the E, I remember in past class schools, it was egg is the sound cue, but this is ed. So it's just, this is very valuable as you're working with your child to really like tune into what they are hearing at school. We also have we use high interest decodable books. These are called geo books. They're amazing. They're 80% decodable, and they're very fun and interesting. As I said, yeah, high interest. And Claire, you can speak more about these books, but the kids absolutely love them.
Yeah, so because 80% of the words in here, the child receives the book in class after they've learnt the skill. And so 80% of the words in the book, they should be able to read. And so if they're reading, and the remaining 20%, we pre-teach the vocabulary. And so if a child is reading the book and they're unable to read some of the words, we know what it is, what skill it is that they haven't picked up, and so we can make sure they have reinforcement. But they're also really good for higher readers because they're not kind of the cat sat on the mat type books. In kindergarten, they don't have a lot of words, and so we're just talking about like oral language development again. And as they get up, higher up the school, they have like, at the back of the book, they have like high interest, like lots of background knowledge and development about the stories. So they're all good for all types of readers.
And again, paired with this, high-leveled read alouds to develop that oral language development and vocabulary and that comprehension piece, as well as, when discussing the content of the book, it really, elevates from, I keep on thinking of Dick and Jane books, but yes, Cat is sat on the mat. It steps it up and that's what we really intend to do with all of our learning. We have a broad curriculum here. Yes.
What grade do we start these books? Is this kindergarten?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Have they started these yet?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We use inquiry-based learning, which is amazing, and we also, this year, we facilitated starting with Acadience reading benchmarks, and we do that 3 times a year, the beginning of the year, middle of the year, and end of the year. And it's kind of a universal screener to help us recognize where we are as grade levels, as well as individual students, and who might be targeted for extra support, who might be targeted for extra challenge. And that's just one piece of data that we use as we really zoom into individual students and not just class-wide. And then how can you help at home? So we have resources here in the handout that I gave you, but think aloud and model. Whether in the car, on a walk, I know we have some walkers to school. If the kids aren't too ahead on their scooters, you can actually talk about what's going on in town. And to really model that high level vocabulary. So for our 2.5-year-olds, sometimes it's moving, like just intentionally moving beyond, like, look at those beautiful flowers, to, wow, those flowers are so vibrant. Look at the way that they sway in the breeze. That makes a huge difference. It seems like a very little thing, a little change, but those changes really impact your child's learning and understanding of the world, and it translates to how they are as a reader. And then MPFS teachers, as I said before, I am a mother of a first grader here, and she's learning to read. We get sent home. This is something that teacher Katie in first grade sent me home. And it's the unit overview, just to read what is sent home. It's the family letter. So this actually tells us exactly how to tap out the sounds, what they're doing in class, so that when I'm working with Matilda and her reading, I know, okay, we have to tap it out. This is how you tap it out. This is how you tap out a glued sound. It also, the children know what it means, like what a digraph means and what a trick word means. So when I am reading with Matilda, stopping and saying, like, oh, what's the digraph in that word? Because it's a science. Claire and I have spoken many times that a lot of students, when they think of math, they like the structure of math because there's a right and a wrong answer, and there's a process to get it. And reading is actually the same exact way. There is a process to get it, to get understanding and the reading fluency. So to look over what our teachers are providing, what they're doing in the class, and utilize them. They even have, suggestions for what Matilda can do on our refrigerator at home, like what sentences I could dictate to her. And then, of course, share this information with babysitters, caregivers, grandparents. When my mom is reading with Matilda, there's so many things I hear. I'm like, no, you can't sound out sh, so share this information with the people that are frequently with your children. I also took the graphic that we had earlier and applied some ideas for what does that look like in real life. So if my child is in the phonics area, what exactly does that mean? What can I do? So again, this is in your handout, and it's little things. Sometimes we are busy, our lives are busy. After school, the kids have an activity, and then it's dinner time, and I might not have time to read with my child, and that's a very normal human thing. There's lots of ways that we can integrate learning and how you can support your child throughout the process. One of the favorite things right now, so I have a 4-year-old and a first-year-old. So the comprehension, when we do read a book, I have them take all their stuffies and make a puppet show for me of the story. So they kind of retell it. And just as a tip, it's a great way for them to have an independent activity for a while. And then I just get a show. So that's a favorite of mine. And then here's just a list of some useful podcast websites, tools that we suggest. And we also are welcome to share any, if you know any great apps that are wonderful that you use at home that the kids seem to love. I like a lot of books that if I can't read with my child, that they're listening to or on the TV or a tablet or something that highlights the text as it reads aloud, so that my child can follow through with it.
Yeah, so why did we come to this point today? Why are we doing this presentation? Because it's really important to me. Literacy is a human right. Literacy affects every area of the school day. It's so important for kids to be able to learn to read and to know how to read. And 32% of students in the United States are reading on level at 4th grade in 2022. And that figure is shocking, and it's not something that I find acceptable. And so for me, why we teach kids learn to read, why we teach kids to learn to read properly using really high quality resources is something that I feel as a school where we encourage diversity and equity, and equity has to be across the spectrum. And so learning to read is important. It's important to us. It's important to me. And you're here today. I know it's important to you. So I just wanted to share that figure with you as kind of why we came up with this morning, why we thought it was important to share some of these resources with you. So questions?
Yes.
I have a lot of questions.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
First, I'll start with like an easy one that I should probably know the answer to, but I didn't learn to read like this.
Yes.
What does tap the word mean?
That's a great question. So when when we talk about those phonemes, those sounds in a word like cat, the multisensory activity that we do in class and that the Foundations program emphasizes is tapping out those different sounds. So cat has 3 sounds, k, a, t, and it's actually your thumb, and it starts with your pointer finger, middle, and then it goes from there. As students progress through the program and they learn digraphs. Digraphs is still 1 sound, so it's 1 tap. But there are such things as they will learn as blended sounds or welded sounds or glued sounds, which is, for instance,
Like ball, all, you would do all, so they know it's 3 letters that are making 1 sound. Digraph, 2 letters that make 1 sound, it's 1 tap. And so it's just so that in their heads that they're connecting. Because when you move from reading to spelling, they need to know that word, although they're hearing 3 sounds, they still need to know that word has 4 letters in it, because they have to then translate that into spelling. And so it's just a process of decoding. Like, how do we get kids to Like, so they know that they are separating that word into sounds. But then when we blend it, we would do sh, op, and then we do sharp at the end, so that they know that that word is then blended into one word. And as they get better at it, you can do this as well. You can do sharper, which is called continuous blending. So like blending those letters into each other, so that they know you have to separate them, but you also have to put them back together as well.
So every letter
Yeah.
is a finger.
Yes.
Well, every sound,
Every sound.
really.
And
Yeah.
So like shop is 2 fingers
Yeah. Sh for the digraph,
for the diagram.
and then o, per, shop.
Okay.
That's how
I just
you
want
do
to
it.
make sure. If I'm
Yeah.
Right,
because
right.
I'm not doing because then he's
Yeah.
gonna get confused.
He'll be like,
Yeah,
"Ah,
yeah.
it's not what they do at school." Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what my teacher
Yeah.
says to us. Yeah.
Great if he could do that.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Matilda said to my mother, like, when they were reading, "That's a digraph," and my mom was like, "What? What is that?" But it's really great. The students, we have to give them the benefit of the doubt of their capability and their understanding, you know. And when we start young, they can really understand these concepts. And
And we teach kids, like in math, we don't think about teaching them, you know, about addition and subtraction. We use all those like high vocabulary words, and we should do the same in reading. Like students, is that, you know, if you've ever met a 2-year-old who's interested in dinosaurs, they can learn pretty high level vocabulary pretty quickly. And the same's to do with language. You know, if it's a digraph, we should call it a digraph, and kids, and it makes them feel successful, because kids who don't read know that they can't read. And, you know, you talk to a student in 8th grade who's like, that book's being passed around and they don't want to get to that page and it's going to be them reading it. Kids know that when they are struggling with readers and they want to feel successful. And so giving them the tools that they know that there are rules that apply to reading and that they understand those rules is really, really helpful for students.
yeah.
Keep going, Matt.
When it's like reading at home, I know like reading in the classroom is
Yeah.
organized. Reading at home is a little bit less so. So we've moved from like sit on my lap and we're gonna read together to like now we're reading stories while he is like in the room listening, but like moving or like doing other things.
Great.
Is that as beneficial, or is it more beneficial to have him like read the words with us and be like, as we, you know, whatever it is, right? Like the dog sat out in the whatever, like, and then point to the words. Is that necessary, or is it just like, is it story for story's sake?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would say there's never a story for story's sake. Like, and being at school is hard for kids when they've been here for 6 hours and they're having to learn all of this. So I think sometimes when they get home, just listening to a story, and often kids will like want to read the same story again and again. That's great because like they're learning repetition. Often kids have to read a book like once for sort of understanding, second time to really enjoy it. So again, that's, you know, don't be afraid of doing that. You read a sentence, they read a sentence. So they're hearing you, you know, use all your silly voices so that they can hear you're doing fluent modeled reading. So that is just as valuable as like sitting down and, you know, 'cause sometimes kids are resistant when they come home to like wanting to. So I would say if you want to practice like phonics skills, short amounts of time, and then if you want to spend extended times doing it, then doing read alouds is fantastic.
Yeah, and I think
makes
also
sense.
considering that, you know, you're a parent of a kindergartner, they might not have the stamina and all of the understanding of the digraphs and everything to really understand everything when they're sitting on your lap. So that read aloud is fantastic. And you can also, you know, chime in every couple sentences. Oh wow, Peter was really cross. What do you think that means? You know, because cross is angry and we don't use cross so much in our, you know, American English, in our American English, but you know, to just like ponder aloud. I love reading to my children not on my lap, you know, when they're doing other things, and then also talking about the story afterwards. You know, oh, I wonder, or making predictions. That's also a wonderful thing. Just having, you know, Sawyer chime in with what do you think is going to happen next. All of that comprehension building and modeling of being a thinking reader. So I think that's just wonderful. And, you know, we have different seasons in our personal lives and outside of school. Sometimes we have the time and we're settled and we're organized and great, but we're parents and we're people. So whatever you're doing, is great. Yeah. Yeah, keep going.
How does this methodology impact how they're learning Spanish? And is it the same? Is it different?
That's a great question.
That is a really great question.
Yeah.
We have our Spanish
Spanish
teacher
teacher.
here.
Yeah.
No, I'm here because I want to learn more about the process to learn to read in English. I can remember I've been I learned to read, in English at the same time that I learned to read in Spanish. So I can't remember the process about learning to read in English. What I can tell you about the process to read in Spanish, it's a little different. It's a little different because there are not so many phonetic combinations as it is in English. So what I focus more right now is in the comprehension part, in the input. In the input, it's what I'm doing, like using methods like comprehensive input. Like I show them like a picture, and then we talk about the picture, and then we start reading short words, and we start like putting letters together, and it's different. Yet there's no there's no confusion or because a kid can learn at the same time to read in English and to learn Spanish. So I don't know if that answers your question or
No, I think
or I
I think so. From what I'm gathering, from what he's bringing home, it seems that obviously there's a significant focus in English, and then the Spanish is what you said, comprehension, understanding vocabulary.
yes yes.
But it's a lot of translating. It seems so. It's like learn it in English first, and then learn it in Spanish. If that,
Yeah, I try not to translate, and that's part of the immersion part of the classes that I'm leaning towards in the classes. It can be like 100% yet, especially in kindergarten, and especially having children with different levels of vocabulary and comprehension. And yeah, not all the kids have been exposed to the language as your kid that has been here for a long time, and maybe at home, I don't know, you try to teach them. Some parents do that, but the more the children advance in a school, I try to make my classes more immersive, so they learn to think to learn in Spanish, to think in Spanish. They learn to think in Spanish. They learn to comprehend in Spanish. Not a lot like the process of translating.
gotcha.
Yeah, at some point it has to be, but I try not to do translation all the time.
Right. Sit down and get out your pencil is always going to be in Spanish
Yes.
and not
Yes.
translated in English. Yeah, it's a fully immersive, immersive
And
approach.
maybe I'm going to start telling them in lower grades. Lápiz. Lápiz, por favor. Lápiz, por favor. Lápices, por favor. Trae un lápiz. Bring a pencil. Like I made more complex sentences so they learn until they start doing it by themselves.
Okay. Well, we are kind of over time, so I don't want to keep you all here for longer than you need to. But does anyone have a last question? Or
Yes. Yeah.
yeah,
Like I was gonna ask.
Yeah.
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 And we're working with Theo here. Our husband is bilingual. So as I was listening to this, like this is all new. I moved to the U.S. as an adult, so like the sounds, like it makes a lot of sense. I wish I've never talked about it.
Yeah.
And there's so many sounds that I can now recognize. And my son, he's 2, and he's correcting me like all the time. Like I say oven, and I said like, is it oven? Or something like,
Oven.
Yeah.
mommy, this is not like so. Like I feel like he recognized both sounds. And he said like, "Mom," in Spanish. How would you say that? But I was thinking like the reading. Yeah, the reading. Like I brought my books from my country, like to teach from a tree, but I feel like it's just so different because, like you say, like phonetics is the sound, but it's in there is what we said. Like it just, I know he's not like, oh, which should we done like parallel then, like the way of reading, like how we put the words together. Like it looks like in English you have to know the sounds, and the amount of letters in Spanish will be like more like 1-to-1. Like you go,
Yeah, there is more. Yeah.
with this, with the E,
Yeah.
always read this. Should I guess it's later on. Like, is there a strategy for later on, like, to mix both at the same time? Or it's more like make a foundation, like what he's going to be using the most, that's going to be English.
Right.
And then later on, add on, like, the reading skills for Spanish?
Right. So I can't say, I don't know much of the research on like the best approach for bilingual families and homes and emerging readers. So I can just speak of as another parent and not as an educator. I'm going to take my educator hat off, just put my parent hat on, I guess. From what I hear, I think it's just equally as important from a young age, and the exposure equal, you know, and that is the most impactful. I wouldn't wait for one or the other. You know, I would just start as you know. It looks like we've been reading all Spanish books this month. Let's go to the library and let's pick out some English books in English. Or it looks like, so that's. But again, I'm not quite sure on any of what the experts say in that area.
You're saying the phonetics are different.
Yes,
Yeah.
I was thinking, like, I have my teach how to read. Like, if I teach that way,
Right.
it's gonna be reading like as I read it.
Yeah.
Like it's like
Right.
questions.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, no, you go. You're the teacher. Coming from a personal experience.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah, well, I wanted to share the experience about raising a bilingual child too. I don't teach Helene. I never. My daughter is Helena. She is 16 years old, and she reads both in English and Spanish. And I didn't teach her to read in Spanish the way that they teach us. Like we start with some consonants like S, M, P. Yeah, and we put them together with A, I, O, U. And we start mama, papa, pepe. Susu, and so we start like making short words.
Yeah.
Then we advance, and then we go with digraphs.
Yeah.
And is the way that kids learn, or at least back when the dinosaurs roamed, learn to read. So my going back to the point. I'm sorry. What happened is that she learned to read. We went word by word, and some words it was easier for her to read. There was no like
First one.
like
Mm-hmm.
a science.
Yes. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
sorry,
As a person, not in my own family, but close family, my brother and sister-in-law, they have 3 kids, learned, they were living in Mexico, they were a bilingual household, and did a lot of back and forth. And there was never, and in other families that I've encountered either here or in my own life outside of here, having another language in the home or in that child's life had never really was never a bad thing, right? And those two things could be working parallel. And in my opinion, based on what I've read and based on what I've seen, I mean, it just the brain can do it, and it does wonderful things for the brain in that way.
And it's the best time.
And it is the best time. It's all wonderful. Like hearing the language, just like Claire was talking about at the start. Like you're hearing it all the time. You're going to be able to do both. Just like you pick up on more complicated words the more you hear it. It's the same idea. So it's all good. It's all good.
Please let me know if I can support your family somehow.
Yeah, and I just wanted to quickly address, I know you're here because you have two like higher level readers. Like in terms of like developing comprehension, two of the big things that are coming out of research in a minute is vocabulary and background knowledge in terms of like really developing high level readers. And so what they're saying is it's really good to, if you have a subject that you're interested on, to do repeated reading of different texts on the same subject so that you're developing like a really broad vocabulary of the same thing. So say you love Titanic, reading 5 different books on the Titanic is a good thing because you have it a really broad knowledge and you can translate that knowledge to other things. So at MPFS, we have a really broad curriculum, which is great. We study things in a lot of detail, and that's supposed to be really good for, they used to think when you taught comprehension, it was all about teaching skills, like what's the main idea of the text, what's the, if we can teach those skills, we can teach comprehension. But they're thinking now the research is much more pointing towards vocabulary development and background knowledge as being the 2 keys to developing comprehension. So that's just something that I've learned recently. I don't know if that's useful to you.
Well, thank you everyone for coming out on this wet morning. It's been lovely. We can chat.
Please.
We're not kicking you out, but that's the end of our presentation. So thank you. Thanks for coming. Thank you.